very much to, I would like to thank Tobias for facilitating the meeting, for putting us in contact, for meeting with Dan. Thank you very much for doing this. Second, I would like to mention, because we were short of time in our experience, we didn't have time to debrief. I think one quick solution to this is to the people that participated into the food performance workshop, I will send on email 3 questions to reflect, which are relevant and also they make the experience yours. We can also talk maybe other the question. I understood there's some dreams at some point. No? Yes?
Yeah.
Could be, yeah, so that's also for debrief. And one other thing, I will set a timer because I have a tendency to talk more than 30 minutes. Just 1 second. Okay, so basically what I want to talk about is part of my performing food practice. One of the things that I do, besides my own work, besides some collaborations, I work with communities, and I thought this would be interesting to share. And I'm going to share 2 works that I did 6 years ago and one which I just finished last week. So these are basically food performances with communities on production of identity, or communities that want to build a reclaiming narrative. This is the title that I initially sent to Tobias, and I like to keep it because it sounded very intellectual, but I have to say I'm more like I work more with aphorism than big theories. Huh? So there are 2 case studies of performances, and then I just took some notes today thinking about the performances. So the first one that I did was in 2010 in Transylvania. There's a city called Blaj. It's in the south of Transylvania, and it's a very small community. And they were basically, one of the narratives that they wanted to change was, we are very marginal, money is bypassing us, funds always. We are seen as a big village. We would like to do something, a festival, something, anything, to look sharp, to look good in the press, and so on and so forth. And our initial proposition was, let's work with the small food producers, because they have very good food producers. Let's work with the small food producers and organize a dinner where the community actually talks about its identity and so. And of course this was also turned down by the mayor, who said, we do not want to do this, we don't want to be seen as a village. We are a small city, we don't want to be seen as a village. So then we had to go back to the drawing board, and what we did is we compensated with the scenography of the performance. We chose this used to be their old cinematograph. Yeah, it burned down, so basically it was just the walls, an empty building in the city center. So what we did, we worked with a team of architects, and we transformed this building, which they didn't believe it was usable anymore, but for them it was a mark because it's really in the city square. We worked with a team of architects, and with recycled materials from some of the factories there, we built something that was like a 5-star restaurant for 2 nights. And that was it. So 2 nights with a lot of press, a lot of politicians, and of course members of the community being present and talking about the past of the city and the present, and trying to present what are their hopes and intentions. And they liked it themselves. Also people from the outside like it. And for the dinner, of course, we were able to use small, locally sourced seasonal produce, which was the intention all along, which was great, because actually in this way we also gave part in the performance to some of the food producers in the area. And now, This is the project that I finished last week. So this is 6 years after. A different community, this one in the north of the country, also is, they were running for European Capital of Culture. And they were also looking for this idea of how could we do a community performance to present a new narrative about who we are and what are our hopes for the future. So what we did there, we went with one food designer and one visual artist, and we worked in the abandoned space, which was a gallery. It's renovated, also in the city center, right in the, I don't know, close to the city hall, but unused. And we did a series of dinners in the gallery. Basically how this worked as a device, if you see here in front, there's a carpet. So every morning from 10 to 1, we invited members of the community to come and we interviewed them. What's your story on food locally? What is your memory? What do you want to do? What was your family about? Where do you come from? And so on. And then from 2 to 6 every day, we worked quickly and we tried to transform these stories into dishes. So for instance, if somebody said, my mother is Hungarian and my father is German, and there was always this clash in the cuisine, we made a dessert that was half Hungarian, half German. And you can see that we did a series of installation tables. So each day we presented a new 4 or 5 members from the community, and you had a food piece, and there was either text or an audio. So either a cutout from the interviews, where cutouts were possible, or we actually did transcripts by hand. And also we tried to reenact some of these stories. Again, it was very fast-paced, and in a week, probably we did like 32 stories from the community. At night, because there was limited seating in the gallery, it's also a very small, narrow space. At night, what you could do, there was these couches outside, and you could come in front of the gallery and you sat, and there was this, you could hear some of the things that were happening in the gallery. You could saw that there was action going on, and there were posters on the side of the wall presenting the project. What are the intentions? The city is running for European Capital of Culture, what this project is about, and so on and so forth. One of the last things we did in the performance is, together with my friend from France, who's a visual artist, we did a series of hand-painted porcelain. So these were basically some of the memories and also some of these discussions about a very poor city in the north of Romania, border with Ukraine, where not much is happening and people are very anxious because, there's a lot of economic underdevelopment and so on. So some of the stories and some of the things we collected during the week, we actually hand-painted on the porcelain. And in the middle of the porcelain there was a seed made with golden dots. And we took this in the last day with audience that came just for this piece, and we actually buried it, and we're going to do an archaeological performance intervention in 5 years from now, just to see what is the connection in between where we started with the work and what happened in 5 years. And now, so these are the 2 works that I wanted to talk about. I was thinking throughout the day what could be said about this kind of work, and I actually made a few notes. I'm going to read them with the time that we have left. When I work with food performances and communities, one of the first things that I hear when I propose a project is how original. It's not, really. There's a whole history of art, if you look, of artists working with food. And I don't mean just painters. I mean really, like there's 150 years where people were actually using food as an artistic medium. And also you have today quite a few. Another question when we go in communities, how can food be art if it has a physiological function? So art should only be contemplated and not necessarily physiological. Yes, but however, when you work with art and you do a food performance, food is derived from the physiological. Like today we worked a lot with biscuits toward the end, and some of the performances, though we talked about behaving with food, nobody was really eating the biscuits. It was about the piece. People were making a point using biscuits. So it went beyond the physiological. Another thing, food is already very performative. So food is already, if you're lucky enough, you eat 3 times a day. This, over the years, we have come to associate food with a lot of meanings, and they are very cultural, very philosophical. They talk a lot about identity, either individual or a group. I saw that somebody was working with food narrative, for instance, in the exercise that we were doing when I was little. This is what this meant to me. So food is already very performative. All you have to do as an artist is get alongside and try to guide wherever this is going to go, because food will also negotiate some of its terms. Food gets everyone's attention. This is also something very important I always see in my performances when we sit down and people are sitting and they are super focused on the food. You know, like we talk about the human right to water and everybody's looking at the pasta, you know, like when are we gonna eat? You know, it's very interesting, but what's with the pasta sculpture? When are we eating? So food will get everyone's attention, and sometimes you have to fight with it to get the attention back. And this is related to another aphorism, that food has a mind of its own. And in this sense, for instance, if you work with some materials, you have to know them. But even if you do know them, sometimes they will show you new things, you know, like sourdough doesn't work here, you know, and then all of a sudden none of the breads grow, and you're back to the drawing board and you understand that there is high pollution in the area, so this opens new doors. I'm personally convinced that food as a system is sometimes showing us things that we are a bit blind, or there's a blind spot in our relationship with food. And also some of the mistakes or some of the gaps that open when you cook for a performance are actually very nourishing. They will open new avenues to explore new ideas. Food knows what is good for us, and we are designing life out of the food system. I'm also a trained chef, I also went to baking school. I see a lot of what is happening with the food system, and a lot of the performances that I do are very critical about what is happening in the, let's say, big commercial area of food production. And I think more and more we are taking life out of the food system, and when I perform, I can see that actually we are giving food a bit of space and a voice. Because in this rhythm, I think we're going to design ourselves out of life at some point. Good food is complacent, so everybody eats, everybody asks, is the food good? Why? Do you dance nicely? So everybody wants good food, but actually it's usually bad food that will get everybody thinking. It's bad food, you know, we sit at the table and that's where things start to work in the head. It's like, am I the only one who has bad food? Why did I get bad food? Why didn't he get bad food? Or something like this. Good food is not always a good answer. What are possible variables in working with food performances and communities? There are always human protagonists, there's the food protagonist, there's the environment, there's space and time, there are tools, and there's a budget. And this will always happen. Also working in food performances with other people, that you have to believe in the people and cook for I don't know, collective catharsis, I would say, or a subconscious form of coming together, while also feeding their inspiration. So people are going to be very inspired by food. I think in the example that I showed, for instance, from last week, when we started on Monday, the people who came at the gallery were a bit suspicious, and they were all like, what are you trying to do with this experiment? And then we explained, and then when they saw that some of their friends had their stories made into food forms, they also wanted to come. So this actually is bringing a lot of inspiration, and also people who came to the gallery, I think for 2 or 3 days, they weren't looking at food the same way. For 2 or 3 days, they were like, yeah, and my memories were served in the gallery as food. With food, I think, even sometimes, even if it's bad performance, at least it's going to be authentic. Food is going to make whatever you're trying to do a little bit more authentic. Don't do in a food performance, don't do anything that you yourself will not be transformed by. I think this is one of the differences with theater. I also graduated theater school many years ago, and sometimes you end up playing a role that doesn't do anything. You just go through the motions and the text and you try to get activated. But usually in performance art there always has to be a transformative power, and it's not only to the audience. You also have to do something that will transform you. Always when I work, if I don't find this, then I know it's not going to be good. Even if people will learn from it, even they will be transformed, they will see food in different ways, they will see their own identity in different ways. If it doesn't do anything for me, then something didn't work, and it's back to the drawing board. Also in the example that I gave now with this, the Biomare City in 2016, we had 6 days of presentation and 1 day for the burial of the installation, and for the first 2 days I felt like nothing was happening. I was like, I did this so much. I know, people come, they're excited, we do this, then the stories, then we transform, And then I think on the 3rd day, we had somebody from the press who came and who was like very, a bit aggressive, saying like, what is this experiment? Why are you calling this art? And we stayed and we talked for like 1 hour and 40 minutes, and I explained the evolution of art for the, very fast forward now, and I blew Romania used to have a big performance scene in the 70s and in the, I thought from that moment on, this does something to me. It was very, very enriching to have a discussion about very basic questions. While as in Brussels, when I perform, people are always, I feel, a bit polite, and my work gets most often quoted. It's like, it's as good as, I don't know, Antonia Baer, but not as good as, that doesn't really build always for a good dialogue. Reality can always be interpreted in edible form. And this is also true when we make, for instance, our stories, or we try to perform with food. Eating from the audience is actually a form of interpretation. Sometimes the audience or sponsors have a limited understanding of food and art, or art. Was it good? Is it nice? That's the moment where you have to start to explain. Yes, but you see, from the 16th, 18th century, art is not only beautiful or educational, it's also meant to do other things. So I think, just like you have to defend food, with performing food, you also have to defend art at some points. Singularities in a community can be made convergent with food faster than politics or investment funds. I worked a lot in small communities, and there everybody was saying our big problem is corrupt politicians, our big problem is the lack of money. And actually it turns out more often than not that it's actually a lack of common vision, or people are demotivated, and money and politicians cannot do this. I didn't go over my time. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you, Antje. Thank you, Rajesh, for your explanation, for your presentation. Maybe there are questions in the audience. Things that you heard, questions that you have. This is the moment.
I have one question. Yeah, I have a question about performance art. Myself, I love performance art so much, but I can ask for you both. Do you think it's important for high school to, how do I say, import performance art in their school for their students?
By import you mean
Yeah,
incorporate it into
in the school system.
Yeah.
Do you think it's maybe necessary for students?
I mean, I think because what Rajesh said, it's really this like transformative power that I see in it, which is why I think it. I mean, I can see 10 or 12 different reasons why you should. Was a random number, but because I think it really helps you to have a self-reflection. It really helps you to get into a dialogue with others. It helps you also to see how you're appearing to others. So this is why I think there is, apart from all the visual thing that you have to keep in mind for a physical stage for your performance, that's visual art traditional thing. Yeah, there is a lot of important aspects. The question is how you transform it to the curricula. Sometimes I think it's maybe not so good to implement it into the curricula, because what I sometimes see how people then, if it's not their thing, interpret it, it's like, okay, then maybe don't teach it. I mean, it sounds really arrogant, but I mean, some people try to make this art form that has come out of resistance and subversive roots, transform it into something that is so super, doesn't have edges anymore. This is when it starts to, so, yeah.
I think it's perfect for teenagers, but I don't know if it's compatible with the high school setting. Because in the high school setting, you have to do it according to a curricula, you have to evaluate competences, you need to know them, and it's like, it's very, very difficult. I think if this is an example, in Brussels, I don't know if you know APAS, Advanced Scenography and Performance Research, APAS, which is an institution that is trying to teach performance. It's not in REITs, so it's not in the theater school, it's not in visual school. They're trying to teach, and the professors there, their motto is, we have to be in constant crisis. So we're trying to teach without having a pedagogy. It's very difficult to do this in a high school. You can maybe try a module at some point to see, now we do something different, where coming to play. But I think box, limited still.
But I have to, can I add something more? It's just that because I was teaching in high school and I wanted to incorporate it, and for me it was the most difficult to do, because it really, I mean, there are just so many also comfort zones for yourself as a teacher that are being touched then in a way. And I found it was so much worth it, and also within the limitations of course, you have the time limitation, as we have today, right? You usually have like 90 minutes in Germany for the older students. Of course, there's just so much you can do then, but still. And I think with this, I mean, I always think how many parents are there who will really check for how you don't have so many restrictions as in other subjects. In the end, practically, no one was complaining that I was taking more on time-based said, but and what I thought was the transformative power again in the high school was that was the only time when I really got into conflict with my role once. I mean, there were probably more, but because once there was this, I gave a task to the students. They could take plastic cups and potatoes, or choose not to. They would have 2 minutes, and they should make a short performance. And then all the students, they were really like very polite, and you know, they were always just outside on the courtyard doing something. And the last student said, "Now come with me, we will go to the street." He sat down in front of the school on a very narrow street, in the middle of the road with his potato, and he was making like little like lines for every car that was passing by. But the cars, they couldn't really pass by, they all had to brake. And that was when I was really getting into, or I was experiencing this conflict between the institution and me as a teacher, and this artist, me, that I also had. Because I was like jumping from one leg to the other and said like, "Jakob, I don't know, like 2 more cars," but then we really had to stop because the guys and the cars, they were all really going crazy and saying like, "You lunatics, what are you doing?" And I thought like, yeah, I mean, the dean will see this, I get a lot of trouble, blah, blah. But then we went through this to a certain point, then I stopped the action, I couldn't bear 2 minutes. And then we had a reflection round, and I think that was when, within this context of the institution, something really happened, which involved me. I was not the guy who like was kind of leading the laboratory and watching the students how they were doing things, but I was inside. And this was so, like, it was such an interesting experience for all of us. So I think it's worth it to give it a try. I mean, yeah.
Thank you, Maria.
And now I'm talking
Okay. Other questions? Things you want to know? Not directly? Okay. And I think we can have a drink. It's in the same place as we have a picnic. And there you can, I think, also ask questions if you have. Thanks a lot.
But there is, practice like this. Yes. It's research where you do the work, and actually the documentation of the work will stand for the research.